but at some point I came to the conclusion that, you know what, this isn't working. And maybe it's really not all her fault. Maybe this is my fault. So
maybe I have a part in this.
Interesting, right?
Hey, what's going on, people? Welcome back to the Smart Couple Podcast. My name's Jayson Gaddis. I'm your host, and I'm grateful to be here with you right now. This podcast is really designed at the core is helping us be who we are through the vehicle of long-term partnership. Because it's in a long-term relationship where you come face to face with your demons and your bullshit and everything that you've tried to hide. You will face yourself in a long-term marriage, and that's designed so that you can become more of yourself. You can grow into you even more. So no matter how intense your partner is or past partner, they're unconsciously, indirectly, and in whatever way they can, helping you be you. So that's the power of partnership. And the smart couple plays long-term relationship this way. This is how you play the game, because that's the only way to win at this game. And winning means being fulfilled and inspired in your partnership over many, many years. If you don't grow, you are dying. If you don't grow, you're calcifying. If you don't grow in your relationship, you're contracting and you're staying stuck and stagnant. That's just the way the human organism works. So if you want to have a great relationship and you never listen to another podcast again, just go grow and work on yourself, and you'll probably have a good experience. Better than if you hope and pray or expect it to be good and without putting any effort in and without looking in the mirror. Okay, so this podcast is really here to serve you in that way, and I'm grateful for your listening. All right, so my next guest I found online, actually, on Instagram. I think it was Instagram first. I found one of his quotes, just came across the news feed. You know how that part of Instagram where you can see other people's that you're not even following, you can see their stuff. Well, I clicked on his, he had a cool quote, and I'm going to read that quote. We don't rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training. And that's a quote by Archilochos, a Greek lyric poet. Really, really liked that quote. And so anyway, I found out about this guy and started following his posts, and he's helping the men. And I really love other men out there who are helping men, take off the shackles of their conditioning and be who they're here to be. So Ryan's on a mission to help guys do that, clearly. So let me say a little bit more about Ryan. Ryan Michler is a military veteran, financial planner, entrepreneur, and runs the Order of Man blog and podcast. Order of Man's an online platform dedicated to helping men become better at every area of life, connecting to their purpose and obtaining self-mastery. Ryan's passion for launching Order of Man came from his own experience of growing up without a permanent male role model in his life, leading to his own study and research into what makes a powerful man, including traits, principles, ways of being and operating, and showing up as fathers and members of the community. So that's a little bit about our guest today. Oh, and he also had another post of his caught my eye, and it said, "How I Won My Wife Back." And I was like, whoa, I want to hear that story. So I went onto his podcast and listened to that episode, and I knew there was more to the story than what he shared on the podcast. And I was like, ooh, I want to get that story. So I was like, I got to have him on the podcast and hear how he won his wife back and share that with my listeners. So I love any kind of hero's journey story. And whenever you hear of a marriage that's tanking and one individual or both somehow turn it around, that's a story that we all want to hear, as well as we can learn from that, right? Because you're challenged at some point in your marriage or your partnership, or you were, and you didn't know what to do, and maybe the thing ended. Well, what could have been possible had you done something different, or had your partner done something different? And so here is a story of a man who did something different to win his wife back. And it's powerful, and it's quite simple. There's really three main things Ryan does here that I want you to get. And listen for those. And then we'll have a very concrete action step at the end in this vein. Okay? All right. Awesome, everybody. Enjoy, and we will talk soon. Hey, what's up? Ryan Michler. Welcome to the show.
Jayson, what's up, brother? Glad to be here.
Yeah, so glad you're here. Thanks for taking the time out of your schedule.
Of course.
So, Ryan, you run a website called Order of Man, and it seems like a really vibrant community that is all about helping men be the best they can be. How did you get into that? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I started Order of Man about 1.5 years ago. So I haven't been really going that long. We've had a lot of success with the group because I think it's resonating with a lot of the guys that obviously are part of the group and the things that they want to hear and know about and what we're doing. But really the catalyst for Order of Man, I mean, you could go back all the way to the time that I was 3 years old. My dad was out of the picture, unfortunately, for the most part, out of my life at that point. By the time I was 3, I had a couple of stepfathers come into my life that were, less than stellar examples of what it meant to be a man. And so I really floundered for a long time. This became evident when I got married and when we started to have children. And I wasn't a good dad. I wasn't a good father. I wasn't a good husband. I just didn't have this thing figured out. And I think we're going to talk about this more in the show of what that actually looked like and how this happened. And but long story short, I began to go on this journey, to figure out myself. And as I had conversations about the things that I didn't know what I was doing, but I was trying to figure these things out, there were a lot of guys who were having the same questions, the same concerns. So, I never want to sit on the sidelines. So I threw my hat in the ring and I said, I think there's something that I have to share. I think there's a story, a message that we can share here. And I started the podcast, like I said, 1.5 years ago. And, here we are. We get 150,000 downloads on the podcast each month. And we've got thousands and thousands of guys within our communities and social media groups and everything that we're doing. And it's been really exciting to be able to see the ability to help other men change for the better in their lives as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you, let's just hang out there for a minute. What do you notice? You talk to a lot of men, obviously, and you're helping a lot of guys out there. What's the current state of men in your experience? Like, how are men as a gender doing? Like, what's your experience?
Sure. Yeah. Within the group, it's actually pretty positive. It's optimistic for me because these are guys who are dedicated. They're committed. They're actually out there. They're striving for new information because they want to be engaged in their life. But I think generally speaking, we see this big passive movement, I would say, within men that we're just letting life pass us by, that we're just kind of going through the motions. And it's actually kind of pathetic. It's pretty sad. If you look at society today and you look at the traditional role of masculinity in men, I see that going by the wayside. And I see a lot of men falling out of what I think a good man should be doing. And we could talk more specifically about what that looks like. But I think what ends up happening is we see these guys who go throughout life just by default. Default mode is like whatever happens, happens. We wake up at the same time. We go to the same work. And we do this for 30, 40, 50 years. And life just isn't fulfilling and it isn't engaging. And then we see the outcome of that in the leaders that we elect as presidents. We see the outcome of this in the lack of fulfillment. We see this in rising divorce rates. We see this in crime rates. We see this with war. It's just, it's bad. It's brutal. And so I'm really out there on a mission to try to fix this and try to bring this whole concept and idea of masculinity back into society and let these guys really step up as assertive men leaders in their families and their businesses and ther communities.
Yeah. Awesome. You said you grew up pretty much without a dad and then you had some stepdads. What kind of impact did that have on you as a boy?
As a boy, I'm not sure. Look, when I was in the mix of things, it was difficult for me to say, "Oh, this is horrible. This is bad," because you don't know, right? You don't know what's outside of your reality, and that was my reality. It really kind of came to a conclusion for me that something was definitely different when I got into high school, because I would see my friends and I'd see them playing baseball with their dads. I'd see them go on campouts with their dads, and I frankly didn't have any of that stuff. So that's when I realized, something's off a little bit here. Fortunately, I was very, very involved with sports. My mom had great insight and she always made sure that I was involved in sports. I had a anger issue. There was times in my life where I was extremely depressed, but through sports and through the coaches that I met through sports, I was able to have an outlet for a lot of those issues because, like I said, I didn't have that father figure in my life to help guide that energy and passion that a lot of boys have, and without some direction, it usually causes trouble. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I got in fights and I did the thing, and I was getting into trouble, and so, but I got involved with sports, and this really came to a head again when I got married. That's when I realized, man, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I have no idea how a husband treats his wife. I have no idea how a father spends time and engages with his children. And there's some big issues, some big backlash that came from my lack of ability to be a good leader and a good man in those situations.
Yeah. How old were you when you got married?
I was 23 when I got married.
Okay. So pretty young. And then,
Fairly young.
how old were you when you had your first child?
20. Good question. 27-ish. Maybe
Okay.
20. I think 27, 28. We waited 3 or 4 years. A lot of that is because I was gone for about 2 years in the military. I was overseas. And so fortunately, we didn't have children while I was gone, but we did decide to have children when I got back.
Okay. Where did you serve?
I was in Iraq, Ramadi in Iraq in 2005, 2006.
Okay. Wow. That could be a whole conversation right there.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of questions coming up right now.
Yeah. I mean, it was a difficult time. It was challenging. There was a lot of hard situations to deal with, but it was absolutely my honor to be able to serve this country, for sure.
Yeah. Thanks for your service, man.
Thank you.
So you got married, you had a kid, and how many kids do you have now?
We've got 4 kids.
4 kids. Wow.
So we've got an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-month-old. So we've got a full house, man.
Damn. All right.
Yeah.
Nice. And all boys?
We've got 3 boys, and our 3rd child is a girl.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So we've got her bookended by boys on each side. That way, if I'm not around, her brothers will take care of her, hopefully.
Right. Exactly. Awesome. So, okay. So when did it sounds like you got married and then you started having children and you didn't really know what you were doing. When did that become painfully clear and what kind of behaviors, what were you doing and dealing with? Because a lot of people get married because they should, and it's what everyone else is doing. And hey, we're in love and stuff, and that's fine. Let's get married. But people kind of have no idea how challenging marriage is going to be until they get into it. So walk us through what started happening and what did it look like when you knew things were off?
Yeah, I mean, when you get married, things are great, right? You're in that honeymoon phase and everything's good, and that starts to wear off. We were traveling around a little bit. I literally left for Iraq 6 months after my wife and I got married.
Wow.
So we had this honeymoon phase, and it was short, and there was no issues. I mean, 6 months, like anybody can make it through their first 6 months of marriage, and everything's still exciting, and there's still a lot of passion and love there. And then I left, and then I came back a year and a half later, and that was a hard time. I mean, it really was, because for a year and a half, I was focused on myself, essentially focused on myself and my brothers, making sure that we stay alive.
Yep.
My wife was focused on her things. She had her own life, and she moved in with her parents, and she had her life, and she had her work, and she was doing some schooling at the time. And then we come back, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I have to worry about somebody else and somebody else's feelings at this point. That's really hard.
Yep.
So we didn't get a long honeymoon phase. And when we came back, literally we were on the verge of separation or divorce just because of the adapting back to each other. It was a difficult time. We did some counseling, which seemed to help, and things were good for a while. And then I got very consumed with work. And I think that really is where it started to cause a problem. Like, I was so engaged with work, so worried about work. I was consumed. I did not give her the attention that she deserved. We had our first son, and same thing. I mean, I was just so distant, and I didn't know how to respond or handle this little critter, and my patience was just lacking. And so I really got drawn into my work and disengaged from my wife and son at the time.
Yeah. And how long did that last for, kind of the disengaged, disconnected phase?
About a year, maybe a little less than, before it came to a head.
Okay. And what brought it to a head? What happened?
I can't remember exactly what we got upset about. I mean, obviously there was a lot of distance between us, a lot of heartache and frustration between my wife and I. She didn't feel appreciated, and looking back now, that's rightfully so. I didn't feel that way either. And we got into an argument one evening, and I can't remember what the argument was about, but I do remember saying to her that I don't even want to be married anymore. And she said the same thing. She agreed. And I remember the next morning I woke up, and I was supposed to go to some training in Salt Lake, which was about 4 hours from where we live. And so I got on the road, and it was snowing that morning, and I got about an hour north, and I said, what the hell am I doing? Like, my marriage is falling apart. Everything's crumbling around. I'm not going to this training. And I turned around and I actually tried to convince her to stay. And by that time, it was little too late. So we separated. She went and lived with her folks for a little while, and I was at the house still. And I tried to see her, tried to see my son, and for a long time I blamed her. How could she do this to me? Why was she disloyal?
Right. I wanted her back, and she didn't want to come back.
Exactly. And so it was probably the darkest time of my life. I mean, I was very lonely. Obviously, I was bitter. I was resentful. I was angry. I was hurt. Just all of these negative emotions were swelling inside of me, and it was a very difficult time for me.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And then she was probably going through her own difficult time, right? And then she's got this little kid.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, and by the way, just side note, I'm guessing, is that common that a guy gets back from serving in the military and he's newly married before he leaves, he comes back and he's having challenges? Is that pretty normal, would you say, or is that unusual?
I don't know that I would use the word normal, and I don't even know the statistics, so I couldn't give you an accurate description, but I definitely know it's a challenge for a lot of guys. Yeah. There is a lot of adjusting, and fortunately, I didn't have it as hard as a lot of these veterans who are coming back from being overseas have it now. But it's just a lot of adjusting. It's very hard to do, and then you add the dynamic of a wife or children, and it just makes it that much more stressful.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is something a lot of soldiers and Marines deal with as they're coming home. How to transition now from being a soldier, being a warrior, to being a husband or a dad or
domestic,
exactly,
totally different vibe, right?
Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah. Okay, so you're separated, you're living apart, you and your wife, and you've got this son, and then what? Was there talk of divorce? Were you moving in that direction?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't moving that direction, but she was. Okay. I wasn't interested in that. I grew up without a dad, and so I didn't want that to have happen. I remember sitting in my son's room, the empty room that he used to sleep in, like talking to his picture, and wanting to win her and him back. And so for a long time, I tried to force the issue. Like, I tried to get very aggressive, not abusive. I never came across that way, but I got very aggressive in trying to win her back, and obviously that wasn't working, and it didn't work. And if anything, it drove her away. And I think a lot of guys will do this. We'll just push and push and push and drive because that's all we know how to do when we try to force the issue. And it ends up driving the greater wedge into the relationship rather than bring the two of you back together again. So that's what I was doing. But fortunately, and I can't even tell you why this was the case, but at some point I came to the conclusion that, you know what, this isn't working. And maybe it's really not all her fault. Maybe this is my fault.
Maybe I have a part in this.
Interesting, right? Maybe I wasn't being a good husband. Maybe I wasn't being a good father. Maybe I was the one who was being disloyal or wasn't doing what I needed to do as the man of the house. So I really started to go on this journey, and I did a couple of things. Number one, I started reading a ton of books on everything, things that interest me, fiction, nonfiction, relationship stuff, 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. I mean, I read everything that I possibly could get my hands on, frankly, because I have a lot of time to kill. And as I started to read and consume great information, my world expanded, and the thoughts and ideas that I had about how this life actually works changed. And so I did that. And the other thing that I did is I started to surround myself with other men who were very successful in their specific field or area. So I would surround myself with guys who were great family men. I surrounded myself with other guys who were great financial advisors because I was just starting my financial planning practice at the time. So I got around these guys and I learned and I gleaned information from them, and I saw what they were doing to be successful, and I saw what they did and I saw what they didn't do. And what's really fascinating to me is as I went on this journey of self-discovery and I really started to figure out who I was, it was like a light switch with my wife. She could notice it. She could see it. She was attracted to it. Mm-hmm. And long story short, after 3 or 4 months of separation, we actually decided to move back in together. And it was an uphill battle, and there's days where it still is. I mean, this is marriage. It's not going to always be easy. But I was in Salt Lake for another training. It happened to be, and I remember her calling me on the phone, and she said that she wanted to move back home. And that was one of the happiest days of my life because I know her and my son would be moving back in. And I had to tread thin ice and really do this the right way this time. But it's interesting when we go to work on ourselves, how other people respond.
Yeah.
I think we try to get other people to respond rather than change ourselves and allow other people to respond the way they will based on who we have become. And that's what I'm realizing more and more as I continue this journey of self-discovery and what it means to be a good man.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice. Okay, so listener, a couple key takeaways there. Ryan went and dove into himself by reading books, and then he surrounded himself with other solid men in his life and people that inspired him, right, to go to the next level. And
Yeah.
was there, it sounds like you weren't doing any counseling, you weren't doing any therapy or coaching, you weren't going to personal growth workshops. This was mostly from reading and just kind of on your own. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we did end up, I started going to a counselor thinking that this would help. And she wouldn't go with me initially. She's like, I'm not going to that. I mean, she had checked out, man. She really had. And we've had conversations since of how close this actually was. I mean, she was in the process of looking for a home, getting a job. I mean, it was bad.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I'm going to go. And so I went, and I would encourage her to go. And it took a while for her to finally say, okay, she'll go. And then she went by herself to the therapist. And the therapist finally said, look, I can't work with you guys if you won't come in together. And so my wife agreed to come in together. And I think we did 3, maybe 4 sessions. And that was really enlightening. She was able to share, my wife was able to share a lot of what she had felt that she was afraid of telling me in the past. And so she shared and got a lot off her chest, and I shared a lot off of my chest. And it was really fascinating. I'm sure that you've read 5 Love Languages, right?
I haven't actually read the book, but I know of the work.
Yeah, I mean, you really ought to dive into that book because it was really fascinating to me that we didn't understand we were showing love, but we just didn't know how to read that from each other. Like I was showing her in one way and she wasn't receiving that, and she was showing me in another way and I wasn't receiving that. Mm-hmm. That alone was really enlightening because now I can look back and I can say, okay, this is how she receives love. So let me share my love, illustrate my love in the way that is going to be meaningful for her. And that's actually really, really valuable.
Yeah. So you educated each other through that book, right? Through the 5 love languages on what works for you and what doesn't, maybe.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. I mean, that's a big one for just any married couple, whether it's a love language or just how you operate. We did an interview with a couple, and one of them was really intellectual and the other one was more emotional, and expecting the other person to be the same way is kind of a recipe for a lot of conflict.
Yes.
So we got to learn how to work with the differences and even celebrate them. Nice.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. So that starts happening. She's more attracted to you because you're working on yourself. You're starting to change as a person. You're taking responsibility. You're blaming less, I'm guessing. And all of a sudden she moves back in. How long did it take for you guys, kind of a couple therapy sessions and stuff? How long did it take you guys to get to a place where it's like, I feel safe again and we're in a good relationship here?
I kind of always felt that way when she moved back. Personally, I felt that way just because of who I had become. And I know this is going to sound really funny, but I think that women are attracted to men and men are probably attracted to women when we don't need each other. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Like I wanted her in my life, but I had really come to the conclusion at that point that even though I would love more than anything to have her in my life, I would not need her in my life to succeed and have a good life. And when I came to that conclusion, that became very attractive to her. So when she moved back in, I felt good about where things were. I was always a little hesitant. I was treading on thin ice. I felt like it was almost like that dating stage again, where you're maybe not completely you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
And so I walked the eggshells for a little bit, but again, I was very comfortable at that point with where I was and where I was heading, and I didn't let the self-development stuff drop off. As far as her, I can't really speak for her, but I'm sure it took her time. And I know that for a long time there was still some resentment about the way things went down prior to our separation. But we continue to work through those things, and communication, even up to this point, has been huge. I mean, we still talk about that time, not to draw back and stir up painful memories, but to learn and make sure we don't fall back into those traps.
Yeah. Nice. And then you guys, you somehow figured it out. And by the way, I'm not assuming you have it all perfect. Like you said, there's challenges always come up, and you fight and you disagree and all that stuff. Never sort of ends, but you got into a better place, right? And then did you start having children again? Because it sounds like 3 more kids came along.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have he's almost 6. So that would have been another maybe year and a half. Must have been about a year and a half after we got back together that we started having kids. So
Nice.
we took a little bit of time just to make sure that we were right, and that was important to us. I didn't want to bring another child in the world if things weren't going to work out. I just I had, just because of my background, I have this belief that I think a son or a daughter, a child, has a right to be raised by a mother and father. I know that doesn't always work out, and it's frankly not always the best situation. But if you can make it work out that way, in my mind, that is the best way.
It's pretty optimal, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. Okay. And when you guys got back together, you started having kids again, things were better than they had ever been, maybe, or better than they were. What other tools did you guys use, or did you personally use, to continue to work on yourself and work on the marriage?
One of the big things that we did and we continue to do is that we each have our separate time. I think there's too many relationships out there, too many couples that think that they just have to be together all the time. And it's like, if you can't find a way to go out and energize yourself, here's what I've come to the conclusion: that in a relationship, we each bring energy to a relationship. And this is over hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations I've had now with men about this very topic. I hear guys that will say, my wife doesn't find me attractive anymore. There's no more passion. There's no more drive or energy within the relationship. I hear things like this, and my knee-jerk reaction is, that's because as the man, you took it all from her. And what I mean by that is we each bring our energy to the table. The wife brings energy, the man brings an energy, and what happens is the man gets so consumed in his day-to-day operations of providing and protecting and doing all the things that a man needs to do, but he never takes time for himself. And women are guilty of this too, but not to the degree men are, because women are great at going out and being with their girlfriends and going on dates with their mom. I mean, my wife is great at that stuff, but I let all my friendships go. And I let all my activities and my hobbies go. And I thought I was doing it for the family. I thought I was being noble. And what ended up happening is I burned through my energy because I wasn't getting this external source of energy in my life. And so once I burned through my energy, I started asking her to provide all the emotional support and energy, and I started to drain her energy.
Yeah.
That's the point where we come to this idea of there's no more passion, there's no more engagement, there's no more drive. She doesn't find me attractive. It's because she doesn't have any energy left. So we've all heard the phrase, you cannot pour from an empty cup. I think what we do very well at this point is allow ourselves to go out and do things. She's going to be gone this entire weekend with her mom for a birthday for her mother. She was out last night with her girlfriends. I go shoot with my friends. There's things that we do independent of each other so that when we come back together, we have the energy to be able to share and have this meaningful relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So a couple points I want to come back to there. If men, what I see, and I'm guessing you're sort of alluding to this about the cup metaphor. A guy isolates himself. He works really hard, and he kind of loses his friendships, loses connection. Maybe he doesn't have any real friends that are actually giving him feedback or pushing him. Mm-hmm. And then he still needs emotional support. So he goes to his wife for that, which can work for a little while. But if he continues to only go to his wife for emotional support, it can turn into like this weird mother-son dynamic. Yes. Where she's kind of caretaking him and making him feel better about himself and like holding him and all that stuff, which I've gotten into in my relationship with my wife early on. We fell into that, and it started to kill just the relationship. It just started to really feel off. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I think you're speaking to something
similar.
Man
within our group. We were talking about this very topic. His wife and him were going through just some difficult times. I don't think at the time they had separated, but what she had said to him is that I did not marry you to be your mother. So it's a great point. Exactly what you're saying. It's like they're not there to uplift and support us 100% of the time with their energy like a mother would be. Yeah. You need to bring something to the table. Yeah. And she needs to bring something to the table. And that's how you create a win-win within your relationship.
Right. So a note to the guys out there, it's essential. And early on in my relationship, I figured this out. Essential to have male friends. And like you're saying, me time to go take care of myself and go do what I enjoy and go take space from the relationship so that I can come back energized, resourced, nourished, and then I'm ready to give to my relationship.
Well, and see, here's the problem is a lot of guys will say, well, I'd love to do that, but I don't have time. I'm busy. I got to provide. I got to do this. I got to do that. And they say they're busy. And you know what? To that point, I agree. And I honor you for your commitment to providing for your family. I do. I think that's a noble thing, but that's the trap. See, it wouldn't be a trap if what you were doing was destructive to the family. What you're actually doing is productive to the family. You're providing, you're out there working, you're busting your ass to make ends meet for your family. And so you think to yourself, well, I can't give myself time because I'm giving in this way. You can only do that for so long before you completely run out of energy. So you've got to find a way to step back and do something that uplifts you so that you continue to provide for your family emotionally and mentally and physically in all the ways that we're supposed to as men.
Yeah. Right on. Nice. Great, Ryan. What else do you recommend just for the married couple with kids out there, for the man to, what else can he do to be taking care of himself? So you're saying he can read books, he can take space, he can also surround himself with other good men. Any other tips you have for that guy?
I don't think there's a whole lot else outside of that. I think it's just getting good at executing on those couple of things. Like, this doesn't have to be a complex problem. But what I would also add in addition to this is that you have to find time to communicate with your wife. It's very difficult because she's busy, you're busy, the kids are there, you've got sports, maybe you have a community or a spiritual calling, you've got your business that you're trying to run. Like, it's busy. And unless you schedule time to have a real conversation with your wife, you probably won't. And I'm not talking about sitting on the couch, watching a show or dinking around on your phone after the day and after the kids are in bed, because you're not going to talk about probably real meaningful stuff at that point. You might be going through the motions of like, how was your day? Great. How was yours? What'd you do? And that's the surface level trivial stuff. I'm talking about carving out a day and a time. We do this every single Monday where we literally go through and we do an inventory within our family. So the kids are involved, and after the kids are in bed, then we talk about this. What's going on? What's coming up? Where are we struggling? Where are we falling behind? What are we doing well? And this gets us on the same page so that we can move forward in confidence together, not independent of each other. So the communication point and issue is critical. It has to be done, and it has to be scheduled.
Oh, wow. This is great. It's almost like I see marriage very much, a portion of marriage is very much like a business. Like, you two are business partners, right? And so this could be like a business meeting where you're getting super real and honest about what's actually going on in your marriage and with the kids and everything else, right?
We communicate about everything except for the relationships, probably the single most important thing in our lives. And we just don't communicate because we take it for granted that our partner is just right there and we can talk to him anytime, that we just never take the time to actually do it. Yeah.
Do you guys also do some kind of date night? Do you have a regular thing where you get your sexy vibe on?
We try to do, I would like to say that we go on a date every week, but that's probably not true. But I would say once, at least every 2 weeks, we go out. Whether that's dinner, a lot of the times, frankly, we might go out to dinner and then we might go to Barnes and Noble, and we'll literally split up. Like, we'll take half an hour, 45 minutes. Like, she goes and looks at her books, I go and look at my books. Then we come back together, we do something together. And, it doesn't have to be, I think that's the trap that people fall into, that it has to be some elaborate thing. The other night, what did we do? We actually ran errands together. It was errands, like it was chores. It wasn't a date, but just the fact that we were alone, and we actually got a sitter for it. We were alone and together, and we could go run these errands together. We were able to laugh and communicate and have a good time, even though we were doing chores, essentially.
Yeah. You guys, 4 kids and then businesses and whatever else, you guys got going on. It is a lot, right?
It is a lot. It is a lot.
So sometimes you just have to divide and conquer.
Yeah, and you've got to be efficient too, right? You've got to find little efficiencies within your day. How do you collapse timeframes? Like, how do you stack things together? And so if we're going to, for example, if I'm going to be having my 2 oldest boys are in sports, and if I'm going to have them in sports, like, wouldn't it be a good thing for me to coach? I'm going to be spending time with them doing it anyways. I might as well be there coaching them.
Yeah.
And so this is a way for us to collapse these timeframes and stack things together so that you're more efficient. This is how we choose to do it. But then also, you think about it, if I take the boys 2 nights a week to their practices and I'm coaching them, I get to spend time with them, which leaves my wife some opportunity to recharge, right? After the kids are in bed. And so this is a way for us to both get what we need in different ways.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Really cool, man. Great. As we wind down here, any last bits of advice for the man out there who's maybe married and feeling a little overwhelmed, maybe disconnected from his wife, maybe stuck in a little bit of blame, complaining a little bit about her, kind of poor meing on himself about his life? What would you say to that guy?
There's a really good book that you can read called Extreme Ownership. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but
Yeah, I read it.
Oh yeah. I think you need to read that book. I think it's very easy to place the blame on our wives or bosses or coworkers or the environment or politics or who's elected president and all of this stuff. But at the end of the day, everything that you have and everything that you are and everything that you are going to be is the result of the choices that you've personally made. And we are so quick to pawn off responsibility for things that go bad. And extreme ownership is just this great idea, this great concept that you are in direct control of your life. And as much as you'd like to blame, and as often as sometimes it is other people's fault, you should constantly be asking, what can I do? What can I learn from this? How can I improve? And that's what helped me in my relationship. I could have continued to blame my wife. I could have continued to say that she was distant and not engaged. And although that may have been true to a degree, how did it serve me? Frankly, It didn't. What ended up serving me was recognizing that I had a large part to play in the demise of our relationship at that point. And when I began to work on myself and take full ownership of myself and forget about the way that she responded or the way she was behaving, that's where things got better.
Nice. I really want to underline this point that it sounds to me like, if I have it right, Ryan, your wife's distance and the way she was kind of pulled away from you and disengaged and not interested in you, and you kind of pushing for connection so long, the longer she sort of held out with, no, I'm not interested, that's what pushed you to finally take responsibility.
Exactly.
Like it's in this kind of weird way, right? Where she's pulling away even further. You finally had this aha, like, oh, my pushing isn't working. That's not going to get her back. I'm going to like actually go work on myself. And that's ultimately what got her back.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm an avid book reader. There's another great book along this lines, Ryan Holiday, who I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. The Obstacle is the Way is another great book, another consideration maybe worth reading that talks about how the things that go wrong in our lives, those obstacles and challenges and hurdles that we need to overcome are actually probably the things that are going to help us the most. And if my wife and I didn't go through the situation that we went through, I would not be the man that I am today. And our relationship could have continued to drive on mediocre, and we both could have been unhappy. But the reality is that horrible situation, that dark time in both of our lives served us both better.
Yeah, that's right, man. Thanks for being, Ryan, thanks for being an example of a man who can turn it around by looking in the mirror and taking responsibility.
You bet. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, really good to have you on the show. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, if they want to know more about what we're doing, orderofmen.com is our headquarters. So we've got all the podcast and the blog and all that information. We also have a closed men's Facebook group. I don't know if you're even part of that, but
I am. I just joined a couple weeks ago.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, we've got over 10,000 guys in the group now. We're having literally thousands of conversations on the topic and idea of masculinity and what it means to be a man and how we behave. So I'd love for any man to request access. You can go to facebook.com/groups/orderofman to get involved with the group.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks for your service, Ryan. All the best to you in your marriage and with your kids.
Thanks, Jayson. Appreciate it, brother.
Okay. All right. Ryan Michler from Order of Man. Okay, go check out his website, his podcast. There's some good stuff on there. And what did he do? What's the essence of what he did? He did basically one thing. He looked in the mirror and he decided to, in his words, improve himself. Another way to say that is he worked on himself, and he just read books and surrounded himself with other solid men that he wanted to be like, looked up to, or had something to learn from. All right. And that, as a man, as a strong man, he's clearly a strong guy, Iraq veteran. He's a leader. He's leading this group of men, Order of Man. A strong guy, it's hard to submit for a strong male figure and learn from other men, because it admits you have a weakness. You have to admit, you have to like put your tail between your legs and admit and kind of humble your ego and humble yourself and be like, wow, I have something to learn here from other men. I'm not just like the shit. So it's amazing how many men have their head up their ass thinking that they don't have anything to learn from another man. And in the personal growth space, it requires a tremendous amount of humility and vulnerability to just admit and acknowledge, like, hey, I have a problem and I need help over here. right? Mike Rostowski's TED Talk, if you haven't seen that, is an example. The core issue that makes men really struggle is our inability or unwillingness to ask for help. So, guys, if you're listening to this, it's that simple. Ask for help. Admit you're kind of suck or you're weak in the relationship department. That is the only reason I am in this position here, is because I had the willingness to admit I was inadequate in the relationship department. I was ill-equipped. I didn't know what I was doing. I blamed women all the time. And until I got out of myself and was like, maybe I'm the problem, then I could do something about it, right? You cannot do something unless you admit you have a weakness and you need help with it. And this obviously goes for the female listeners too, that you're not really going to get to the next level unless you ask for help and you go find the best help possible and you surround yourself with people who you want to be like, whether that's in business, relationships, finance. It doesn't matter. Just go find that person that's farther along than you are and say, hey, I want to learn from you. All right. Okay. That felt really valuable, this podcast. It's like you could say it's simple, and it kind of is. If you want to win your wife back or you want to win your husband back, and you get that you admit you're a part of the problem, and then you go do something about your part of the problem. You don't try to focus on them and change them, right? As Ryan said, you got to focus on yourself. And you're not always going to win that person back. It might be too late, too little, too late. That's okay. There's another person out there for you. And the more you look in the mirror and face yourself and become the person that you know you can be inside of your heart, the more you'll find people like you that resonate with that vibe, and you'll be in a great relationship someday. So what is your action step today? What is your action step? It's quite simple. Number one, quietly in the silence of your own mind, when no one else is looking and no one's around, and you're up late or early or at your work distracted, admit that you have something to learn. Admit that you don't have it all figured out. Admit that you're a little weak in this area of relationship with someone, your parents, your spouse, your kids, your friend, the boss. Somewhere you have a compromised or conflictual relationship. Admit that you have something to learn there. Step two, and this is a good practice, is reach out to one person in your life. And again, for the men, this will be a little harder, most likely. Reach out to another man, okay, not just your wife, because a lot of men will go just to their wife with their emotional problems, but they won't go to men. And that's understandable because a lot of their male friends are a little jammed up and also not that helpful. They might want to fix it. See if you can pick the most trustworthy man in your life and ask for help. Hey man, I need some help. I just kind of screwed up my marriage, or I really don't know what I'm doing with my wife or my girlfriend. I feel like I'm just blaming her all the time, and I'm guessing that's not going to get me very far. Okay, so do those two steps. One, admit you got a problem. Two, ask for help. It's kind of like an addiction, right? It's kind of a similar path here. But by admitting this to a friend, to yourself first, and then asking for help with a friend, you're going to probably get a little farther than if you don't do either one of those steps. Okay, getting near the holidays here, and I'm doing another part 2, how to deal with a family drama, part 2, Facebook Live. All right, Facebook Live on December 19th. That's a Monday at 12:30 Mountain Time. 11:30 Pacific, 2:30 Eastern Time. And then I think that's evening time in Europe, right? and maybe the middle of the night in New Zealand and Australia. So guys, come join me if you can. Take a little lunch break. It's Facebook Live. The apprentices from the relationship school will be joining us again to answer some of your questions. These people have been training in the trenches with me and are prepared to also try to help you. And it's going to be fun. The holidays are an intense time. And if you're still angry at your parents or still hurt by them and you're still acting like a teenager or a hurt child, this is going to be good for you to listen to. All right. I also did a podcast about this. Remember, you want to go back and listen to that. It's a couple episodes ago. But if you want to get me live and ask me a question, that's the place to do it. Okay. And then one more fun announcement is that we're going to try to do an Ask Me Anything show pretty much every week in 2017, which means there'll be 2 podcasts coming out. And it's ambitious, I know, but I'm getting my team rallied here to go for it. It'll be a much shorter episode, and essentially what's going to happen is I'm going to read a question and answer it. So it's just one question, and I'm going to dive in and unpack one question every other episode. And I'll also be broadcasting that live on Facebook and likely Instagram. If you want to watch me live and even chime into the conversation, ask clarifying questions about that question, let's go a little deeper. Come join me. It's going to be fun. Okay, folks, have a great rest of your morning, day, evening, and we'll talk very soon.